Welcome back to another episode of Recorrelated Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Natalie Baker, and today we have with us Dr. Nikki Robinson. She is currently a senior manager at IBM in their cyber resiliency and recovery department. She's an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland at their global campus, multi-time published author. She's released last year, she said effective vulnerability management is her newest book. So Nikki, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself. Go ahead and feel free to dive in a little bit and then go on.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me today too. I think I'm at 17 years in the industry now, IT and cybersecurity. So I spent the first roughly 11 years of my career in IT operations specifically, and then moved into cybersecurity. So that while deciding to get 2 doctorates, a DSc in cybersecurity and a PhD in human factors, just because I thought it would be fun. But I like to round out all of the technical, practical work that I do with research and teaching as well.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the first shot at taking your hot takes on our topic, which is the human factors of cybersecurity. So you go ahead with your hot takes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think hot takes, human factors in cybersecurity. One of the things that I hear a lot, which is why I love doing podcasts and kind of dispelling this, people think human factors in cybersecurity, they think security awareness and training. That's always the first thing that they think of. And it's not wrong. That's definitely a piece of it. But the human factors discipline on its own comes from the sort of aeronautics aviation industry. And we kind of are bringing that into cybersecurity. So it's really about understanding how people use the tools that they use, but in a cyber and IT context.
Okay. That's okay. My key takeaways are now my hot takes are kind of gone, but yeah, I kind of really like that mind shift there and that perspective there.
Yeah, it's one of those things I used to think too before I really understood what the human factors discipline was, and I credit the incomparable Dr. Calvin Nobles with he's been such a champion for human factors in cybersecurity, and he really changed my mind on the way that we think about integrating psychology and really understanding how we use our tools. Like my favorite example that I use is how many different types of hammers we use as people. There's a hammer that you use to hang a painting, but you're going to use a different hammer to like a mallet for something else that you might use on a rubber tire or something. So we build different tools for different sets of needs. And it's very much the same way in IT and cybersecurity. So it's taking a lot of those principles with us into cybersecurity.
Okay, awesome. So with that, I mean, you did a really great job actually helping define that. What kind of do you think do you think behavioral science kind of plays into this in a way, or is it, can we get more into that aspect of it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a behavioral analysis perspective, we integrate a lot of different pieces of psychology into human factors. I say human factors is this beautiful blend of engineering, design, and psychology. And so human behavior is absolutely part of that, especially when behavioral analysis is kind of how we do things and how do you kind of break people's habits of doing the same thing over and over again. And I think about that very much the same way like we deal with in a SOC, or we deal with in any type of operations role where you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you get burnout and you get fatigued, you get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. So absolutely, behavioral analysis comes into it, or the behavioral sciences in general, because we want to understand how people interact with the tools that they use to try to help prevent burnout and stress and frustration, because we want to help people grow and build in their careers and not feel like they're stuck doing the same thing all the time.
Okay, so that's kind of like I kind of resonate that to like how for an example being like how we kind of have now learned all the different ways that we can use AI and machine learning in cybersecurity to really help prevent burnout and really keep people at the forefront of doing what's the important work is, while like kind of helping with the monotonous work that we don't necessarily enjoy doing as much.
Yes, 100%. And I think that's maybe that's like another hot take, because I know I see in, in the news, it's like AI is coming to take all of our jobs and all of that. And I think I think AI has been an incredible tool, for us to do our jobs more effectively, for us to automate all the things that, I don't want to do every day. It's just like how we used to do when I was a sysadmin and we would use scheduled tasks or we would script things.
Yep.
We use it today in AI machine learning capabilities a lot in the same way that we used to, just a lot more mature. It's a lot better now than it was than writing a script to automate some task.
Yeah. Yeah, I even like in my sysadmin days, like I would go into companies and like automate a lot of tasks out, like just through scripting. That's what I specialized in, automation and scripting. And I had a lot of people that would come up to me and they'd be like, "Well, you're going to automate yourself out of a job if you're not careful." And I was like, I think they're always going to need somebody to maintain this, so I'm pretty
Yes.
sure we're going to be okay."
Yeah, automation breaks just like everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, like they were just like, you're gonna be so good you're doing such a good job at automating everything. You're gonna automate all of us out of jobs. And I was like, no, they still need us for our brains and being able to like logic through things. So I think that we'll all be okay.
Yeah, and I think that example too of like, a SOC or a help desk or, pick your tiered operations role, there's always going to need to be someone that takes a look at something, right? Like whether it's we can automate alerting and take a look at those, and maybe there's some analysis that can be done, but we're always going to need to investigate, right? We're always going to need to dig a little bit deeper to really understand what's going on. There's always still going to be false positives. There's still going to be places where we miss something. So I think absolutely the human's going to continue to be, a major part of what we do.
Yeah. I always thought it was funny, and I was just like, okay, we're always going, because even today I was on a conversation with I was like on a call with a client, and I was like, and see, we can automate part of this process probably out, but like there's like something about like threat modeling at a certain point, you can't just like automate that to being like a yes or no decision. Like there's a lot of like weighted decisions that are happening, and that's really going to be hard to automate out. Not that you can't do it, it's just to automate out all of threat modeling is kind of to get rid of the purpose of threat modeling. I feel like it should be a discussion that you're having when you're doing that. Do you have any takes on that?
Yeah, 100%, because threat modeling also changes all the time. To me, a threat model is dynamic because our environments, our ecosystems change so rapidly. The threat actors change all the time. The sophistication of attacks change all the time. So like threat modeling should never be, one activity that's done, just kind of in a silo. It should be a continuous thing that's done, right? Yeah, of course, it should be dynamic. So I think to your point, you can probably automate maybe, what type of data you want to bring in and kind of how you want to look at it. But you're right. At the end of the day, you kind of have to make some decisions and say, this threat vector isn't actually as important to me because of X, Y, and Z. And there's always going to be some, human decision making that needs to take place.
Yeah. So with that, how do you foresee like empowering employees to become part of like the security solution? I think that's really important, is like as a leader, we're talking about this, but like how are we empowering our employees to take that step at becoming the part of the solution, right?
Yeah, I think it's two parts, and I'm gonna wheel back in the human factors conversation around tooling too, because I think some of that comes back to us as the people who are giving people the tools or saying, you must use X tool or you must do this, perform this function. I think the easier that we can make security for people, the easier it's going to be for them to implement. If we by default let people use a default password, that's pretty easy. Of course I should change that password, but it's pretty easy. I can just use the default password. So So I think we need to make security easier for people to do, to just sort of give it to them, give them a secure, a secure solution. I think that would help alleviate some of the burden on the user. But I think to get users more interested or to feel like they're part of that security picture, again, maybe another hot take, I think us as security professionals have to really listen to our users and what they're struggling with. Because this is one of the reasons why I think research is so important in what we do as practitioners. Going through the doctorate process, the first thing I had to do was create a problem statement. And it took me 8 hours of getting grilled by professors to come up with one problem statement. I did not get it at first, but it was because, I was like, well, because we need more security engineers. Like, that's a thing. We need more security engineers who understand development and security and this and that. And my professors were like, that's not a problem. You're coming up with a solution. What's the actual problem you're trying to solve for? And after digging for 8 hours, I had come across all of this vulnerability chaining research and vulnerability scoring. And I was like, oh my gosh, vulnerability scoring is really challenging for people. It's tough to understand, okay, I've got all these criticals and highs. I have to remediate them within X amount of days. And there's a ton of them. I don't really know what they mean. I just know that I have them. So I think if we can make some of those conversations easier for people too, right? Help give them the tools to prioritize vulnerabilities and remediation. So I think, again, some of that is giving them the tools so that they can make it, easier for them. But I think us as security practitioners listening to where their real challenges are, is it that rotating their password every 90 days is a pain? Is it that the MFA solution for them isn't working quite right? Is it, it could be any number of things. So I think if we can allow them to provide us that feedback and we can try to listen to that, we might be able to make things a little easier for them.
So and I think I already know your answer to this question, but like as a security practitioners, do you think that we should be going out there and just like asking our users like, hey, like, what do you think? Like, where do you have pain points at? What are your problems with the solution? Like, we're not just trying to drop this in here, but like, where can we make your life easier at?
Yes, I'm a total advocate for that. Years ago, when I joined the security team at a previous employer, we had a tech day, and they said, hey, we want the CISO office to come to our tech day and, give a presentation on all the things you do. So we created this amazing poster board, and we had these cool graphics showing all the different attacks happening at all the times. And we were like, oh, this is so cool. We had so many people come up to us and they're like, who are you? Like, who are you? What are you doing? We have a security team? That's great. And that was such an impactful moment for me, because we do so much work that people never ever see. And so I think us getting in front of people, telling them about us, who we are, the work that we're doing, and asking them how they feel about it, and being open to feedback, right? If somebody comes to me and tells me my solution sucks, it's like, okay, all right, I'm gonna take the feedback. Let's see how we can make this better for you and me. So yes, I'm a big advocate of that. I think relationship building is one of those things that helps us make better tools anyway, and better decisions. Because to your point about threat modeling and understanding our environment, understanding our people, our users, how they interact with the business, that's always going to help me make security better for the business. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for that.
Yeah, I love that. Because I'm always the user that's like, I'm gonna tell you need to fix this, and you need to add this feature, and you need to do this, and then I feel really bad about it because I'm like giving these development teams like of these tools like all this work, and I know I'm doing it, but like, or I'm like, oh, it'd be a really cool feature here if we could do this instead, because it would make my job 10 times easier. But a lot of times I have noticed that like some of the really good tools that I've used, like those teams have been like really on point with like, oh, you want us to add this feature? That's a really good idea. Thanks for bringing that to us. We can now make that a feature for everybody.
Yeah, I think so. And I've worked with so many great developers and products that are very open to feedback, to say like, oh, okay, sure. Yeah, maybe we can't do this today, but we can definitely do it tomorrow. Like we'll figure it out. So I think there's a place for that in product development. And I think there's also a place for that in security too, right? So for us to say, are our policies and procedures working for you? There's always going to be some of that we can't change, right? Especially if you're in the government space. sorry, you got to remediate. we don't have time. You just have to do it. Those are our federal guidelines. We have to do it. But, if you can help automate some of the remediation, if you can help automate some of your patching and things, like, it makes those conversations a little bit easier, and then you can focus on the really tricky stuff. So I do think that there's still a place you can get to where you can make security a little bit easier on your users. Again, it's always going to be, dependent on rules and regulations of your industry, but there's always a little wiggle room to try to make things easier.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So how would you look at like human factors when you're looking at risks? Because like there's a whole human factor when you're looking at risk and you're addressing risks and stuff like that. There's also a human factor there. So switching to that, I mean, we can just switch contacts back and forth if you bring the other relevant stuff like the platform thing.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, I think for sure, right? Because that's kind of where that human behavior thing comes back into the picture, right? Whether you're accounting for, insider risk or external risk, right? Because the human factor could be an external entity that is trying to gain access to an internal identity and compromise an internal identity that becomes an insider because they're compromised an internal identity. So I think absolutely you have to account for human behavior, especially when you're doing analysis, right, of your data. Because if I don't take into account, like, okay, I see something happen at 9 a.m. every day. Okay, I assume that's probably scripted nonsense or whatever. But if I'm looking at patterns of how somebody behaves, like business email compromise is a really great example of this, where they'll compromise somebody's account and just sit in there monitoring for 6 months, and they'll pick up on the tiniest nuance of how somebody sends or crafts an email, the hours when they send emails, who they send their emails to. Like that's what they do, right? They want to understand how the human behaves so that when it's time, they can mimic that person and try to get, the money sent to them or wherever. So I think for me, it's, if we don't account for human behavior, we're definitely missing that picture. So we have to put it into context especially around data analysis. And incident response, understanding what happened, right? Like who was doing what, and how did this happen?
Yeah, I also think of it from like when you're even looking at like who would be attacking my organization, because like I've been in security ops before, and it's like who's even interested in the data that I have, or who's going to be interested in what I actually possess, and what's more going to be considered more critical to our business. And like really thinking about, okay, if I was going to be that attacker, what would I do? How would I go about this? Like, what can we do? And then that's where I've always like really tried to help organizations out at, is like making those like small suggestions that really seem like they're really tiny, but they could be really making a monumental impact and making everybody's life easier. And that seems right on topic.
Yeah, I think that's true too, right? Like the sort of switching gears a little bit, but that you reminded me, like having that attacker mindset, like understanding how people actually want to get into systems. I think part of that's threat modeling, like we were just talking about. I think some of that's understanding who actually wants to gain access to your data and why, and then also building your detection picture, right? Like what matters the most to us? How do we build criticality around alerts and notifications so that me, human being, can look at the alerts and understand like what's really happening? Because if we don't account for human behavior, we're definitely going to be missing things. So yeah, definitely a big part of the picture.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So we've talked about like empowering employees becoming part of the solution. What about like shifting from like kind of going from like a reactive security? I've seen a lot of like companies, and I think you said something earlier that kind of triggered this thought for me, which was like shifting from a reactive security culture to having more of that proactive security culture. Like, what are some good things that organizations, that leaders can kind of like start implementing now to get that built out, as if especially like for smaller companies that are trying to like make a big impact here? How do you recommend going about it? Where do you recommend starting at?
Yeah, a few things that I recommend, because ultimately the idea is, how do you kind of if I assume that, I think what were the latest statistics? It was like the moment that an external facing system is brought online in a cloud account, it's like 20 seconds before it's hacked or something like that. It's insane how fast it is. It's crazy. So I think for me, like a couple of places that you can start to really get to a proactive picture, that means that I don't want to be tuning and crafting a bunch of detections. I want to make sure that the door is shut and there are very small cracks that people are going to be able to get into. That means, do I have systems that are external facing? If they're external facing, what vulnerabilities exist on them? What ports are open? Who has access to them? What does my access management look like on those systems? That to me is number one, right? Because that's the door that they're going to try to come into. Insider risk is a very, very small piece of that, right? That's not necessarily a problem you're going to solve on day one, but external facing systems you can solve on day one. And if you have to keep them external facing, that's where you choose your network segmentation, right? You say, okay, at least if they compromise this one application server, they can't get to my database server, and that's what matters the most. I don't care if they get the application server, so be it, it's gone. I think one of the other things that they can start with to get to a proactive picture, because credential theft is one of the biggest ways that people get in, whether that's with phishing or secrets or, pick your mechanism for getting in. But I think the other big picture is identity and access management. How are you protecting and storing your credentials and limiting access? So as long as you're starting with that, hey, I'm only letting a few people have the keys to the kingdom, and then their accounts are even locked down. We've got MFA, all those good things in place. Nothing's infallible, but at least if you can limit how far people can get and how many items that they're going to have access to, you're really starting to close that picture of like getting into that reactive standpoint. Because then when you are reactive, it's when you should be, something bigger is happening. So those are my first like couple of steps to take.
Yeah, I would agree, especially password managers are so easy to get, but people think that like password managers are the end all be all, because like there's still an online system that's storing a password. So like really the only way to be 100% sure that your password that's being kept in that password manager isn't compromised is like you better be salting your password. And that's something that I've taught numerous people. I'm like, make sure you salt that password before, like, you'll just use what you have in there and save it and think that that's going to be your password all the time. Like, salt it so that you have to, where in there it's salted at, everything like that. But I kind of like, I've seen out on LinkedIn, so many people are like, oh, the actual physical password keeper is no good. I see that and I cringe, and I'm like, actually, that's kind of like probably one of the more secure ways of keeping a password nowadays.
I tell people the same thing, that they're like, well, password manager, this and that. And I'm like, yeah, of course, right? Like if it makes your life easier, especially if you're an IT admin, like there's no way you're going to have that many complex passwords that you're going to have not stored somewhere, just because it's impossible not to. But yeah, I love the password notebooks. I think they're great. And they make some really fun ones. So, I think it's absolutely safer. That it's offline. And unless you're traveling with it and you might lose it, which then that would be pretty bad. But if it stays at your home or your home office and never goes anywhere, unless somebody comes into your house and steals it, it's a pretty safe mechanism to use.
Yeah. I always see it, and then there's always like the both sides of the argument. I'm like, I kind of lean like for those, unless like exactly an IT admin, I don't want to write down that long password and like create that
and then literally type it in every single time. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough, especially when you have like idle session timers and things that you get kicked out of your system every hour or whatever, and you have to keep logging in over and over and over again. It just, it makes it impossible to get work done. So there has to be that balance of functionality and security.
I those session timers, they get me sometimes, and I'm like, oh.
It's like every hour. Okay. I'll log in every hour. Okay. No problem.
I wasn't even idle for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
My session is gone.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So, um, how do you think, like, as a leader, looking at it from like a leadership perspective as well, because I always try to put a leadership spin on it. From a leadership perspective, how do you think like leaders can actually go about being better for their employees? Like we talked a little bit about insider risk. I think that the biggest way of minimizing insider threat is completely being great to your employees, like treating them like they are the best things in the world, because they probably are. They're what are keeping your business running. So how do you think like managers or leaders can reduce stress while impacting, their work, like their teams to go and do this like excellent work? And how do you think stress kind of like really does impact like work quality and stuff? What are your takes on that?
Yeah, I think my best management strategy is knowing that people are individuals. Not everybody likes to be managed in the same way. Some people like to really be told what to do, right? Like to have really clear outlines and guides and tasks, and people work really well like that. Some people are like, don't even talk to me. I know what I need to do. I got it. Like, just let me do my thing. And then there's always that in between, right? And so for me as a leader, it's sort of understanding how my people best operate. Like what operating mode works best for them? Where do they shine, right? Is it me leaving them alone and just they know they've got the task and they're good and I'll check in with them on Friday, right? Or whenever. Some people, it's really clear, consistent communication. So for me, it's adaptive leadership. It's adapting my leadership style to help the person best be their best. That to me cuts down on a lot of stress for people. And especially if someone's coming to me, and especially if I can tell they're a little bit panicked, some of that's just empathy and understanding, right? If I can understand that like someone's a little panicked, it's like, okay, how can I diffuse the situation a little bit? And I actually talk about this a lot in my first book, Mind the Tech Gap, where, we don't talk a lot about empathy and emotional intelligence in regard to our relationship building with other groups. So the first book was really about how IT and cybersecurity teams operate together, but I extend that to pick your team, right? Development, administration, like kind of pick your group, and we all have different goals in mind, right? And different missions. And I think for me, it's like understanding that my mission is probably not going to be the same as somebody else's. So CIO's mission is functionality, operability, and probably innovation, engineering. They've got a number of things that they've got to do, right? But their biggest thing is uptime and functionality.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's where the disconnect comes from. And that's from a leadership style perspective too, right? Knowing that like not the way I necessarily want to be managed is the way that everybody else wants to be managed. So I just try to take that mindset with me and try to understand and ask very thoughtful questions like, hey, how do you like to be managed? Do you want to have a one-on-one every week? Do you want to not talk to me till February? What works for you? And I think being okay with that, understanding that like everybody's an individual, and we just kind of have to, for me, I just try to adapt to what makes the most sense for them. As long as because I find that people are more productive in safe spaces. If they feel like they're safe and that you've got their back, they're going to be more productive.
Yeah, I feel people do their best work when they're like, when they know that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what happens, you're always going to be there, like,
yeah,
with them through it all and helping them through it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I will be swimming through it all with you.
yes, we're in it together. we make a decision and we just go for it, and we'll figure it out. Yeah, I think that too, that it's building a safe space, but I think it's also about, I'm a big proponent of giving people an opportunity to test things. To me, it's not about building a perfect solution on day one. It's about trying something and seeing what happens. I'm a big trial and error scientific method type person, right? Pick your experiment, conduct your experiment. Does it work? Great. Does it not work? Great. Go back to step one and let's try that all again. So I think using that method is really helpful too, because it helps build that safe space. You can go in and fail and not feel bad. Okay, I failed. Great. I'll start back at the beginning and we'll try again. it encourages a little more creativity too, right? You don't feel like you're stuck in this box or you have to do everything this way. You can kind of try some different things and see what works.
Well, and I think a lot of us, especially in the tech side, like to have that ability to be able to test things and do the trial and error. Like, I mean, I think that a lot of us tend to, at least from people that I've met, I've almost very rarely have I met somebody who's like, I am not better at learning through testing or
Yeah.
like find hands-on learning is our style of learning in IT apparently. And it makes sense. I mean, I went to a technical like college, so like that makes sense. Like I wanted the hands-on experience. What else have we not talked about that you wanted to talk about with the aspect of human factor?
Yeah, I think as far as human factors and cybersecurity goes, I'd love to touch just a little bit more on the psychology aspect when it comes to vulnerability management specifically. Because when I first started doing human factors, it was really cybersecurity at large, and then I started seeing the benefits really heavily in the vulnerability management space because I think that's a topic that we hadn't seen a lot of progress in until the last couple of years when CISA-KEV came along and EPSS came along and CBSS has been, iterating a lot more frequently. We're starting to see a lot more progress in that space, but our tools are getting better. Some of our policies and processes are getting a little bit better. But I think we're still not talking about how people feel about vulnerability management. And some of that is just perception based. If somebody's looking at a spreadsheet that's 10,000 vulnerabilities, that doesn't feel good. If you remediate, if you remediate 5,000 vulnerabilities in a week, and next week you see 10,000 more, that doesn't feel good. It feels bad, and I think we just don't talk about that a lot, right? That we tend to show all the vulnerabilities that are outstanding. Sometimes just showing someone all the work that they've done, all the patches they've actually implemented and fixed, and showing, like a green bar going up instead of a red bar going up. Sometimes it's something as simple as a visualization can actually help make somebody feel a little bit better and not just feel like, oh my gosh, I'm climbing this mountain and I'm never going to get it done. Like I'm never going to get there. That feels so awful. So I like to bring from a human factors perspective, just understanding that the way we use our tools, the way that we show our data is just as important to how people can actually be effective in vulnerability remediation as it is the findings themselves. So data visualization actually leads to both boost of morale and not feeling like, I'm never going to get it done, so why bother anyway?
Yeah. No, I've definitely sat there and been at the receiving end of seeing those vulnerability reports where you're just like, I mean, where do I even start with it? Like there's so many, like patch your systems, please. Please go patch everything and then come back to me and we'll run another one. Okay. Because like there's nothing we can even do. I can't even start somewhere. Like I can't even prioritize when there's 10,000 like high vulnerabilities. Like
yeah, 100%. So I think visualization and data science and data science's home in cybersecurity, I think is just as important.
Yeah, and I like your point about having how you cut the data too, to where like, showing somebody the progress that they've made versus like what they have left to do. Like, I mean, that that is a big because that is a big thing where you're just like, oh goodness, we have more vulnerabilities, and you just see them grow and grow and grow, and you're like, if we don't get them taken care of, they're just going to become another poem, and I really don't have the ability to write 5,000 poems.
Yes, 100%. So I think that was just my biggest point is that sometimes it's not a tool problem or a technical problem. Sometimes it's a visualization problem or a psychological problem that you can fix by, just changing the way you look at the data. So.
Yeah, I like that. And you can also get a different perspective too when you look at the data in a different way, right? Like it's when you look at data from one point of view or one perspective, that's all you're ever going to see. But the minute you start looking at it from a different perspective, you're like, oh, I didn't realize that so-and-so was like up until 10 o'clock at night, every night, patching these systems every night. And like, now I'm seeing that like every night at 10 o'clock, these systems are being patched flawlessly.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, maybe we should shout them out and say, hey, thanks guys. We appreciate
Yes.
your work team.
Yes, 100%. That's the other thing too, right? Is gratitude. I think gratitude for, because it is a lot of times it's a thankless job. The people that are patching, I say this because I did it for many, many, many years. I still do it today. So I know it can be a really thankless job. And so sometimes just saying thank you to someone, I know it sounds really simple or maybe like cliche, but it can really make somebody feel like, oh my gosh, I made a difference. Okay. I can keep going.
Yeah, because sometimes it's just that little like boost to their morale to where it's like, okay, like sweet, somebody appreciated. It's the appreciation sometimes too, is like if you can genuinely show somebody, I think that if that you truly appreciate how they went above and beyond or how they helped you out and helped you solve a problem, they're going to be like 10 times more willing to do it again and again
Yes.
and again.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. You build, that's the other thing too, is that coming back to the building relationships and why that's so important, because I find that more often than not, building a relationship helps me get things done faster, right? Because it's not just about what I need them to do, it's about how I can help them too. So if you make it a partnership and say, hey, maybe I can help you remediate this vulnerability by writing a script for you. Maybe I can help you by give me the list of your top vulnerabilities and I'll tell you what to fix first and how to fix it, right? Like actually help them do remediation. I find that that's really helpful. And then when there is a problem or if something bad is happening, it's like make the relationships outside of the chaos. So that way when the chaos happens, you're like, oh, hey, Joe, great. We already know each other. Hey, can you do that thing real quick? So, so I think, building those relationships outside of turmoil helps when things, can be really tough.
Yeah, especially with the IR side of health, because when it gets tough real fast and it goes downhill really, really fast, and you're just like,
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I want people. That's just it too, right? Is I don't want people to see me and just like be full of dread.
Right.
I want people to see me and be like, oh, okay, good. Nikki's here. It'll be okay. Like, okay, well, fine. Yeah. We'll figure this out together. So I think that's part of it too, is just the building really solid relationships. I think it's been one of the things that I've seen be so successful time and time again, because it's a partnership. It's not me throwing things over the fence at someone and saying, hey, do the thing. Did you do the thing? Have you done the thing? If I can try to help them do the thing, that usually helps get it done a little bit faster. And I take a little bit of burden off of them too. So it's win-win.
Yeah, and you also you can sometimes like use that as like you're not just passing it off, you're also helping collaborate and come up with ideas that you wouldn't have thought of on your own, and the other person would have thought on their end, but together you are able to kind of collaborate together and make a dream team come true, right?
For sure. I find so often, and this is why I say it's so important to dig into the problem statement, because sometimes I'll go into something saying, I know what the issue is. I'm going to walk in, I'm going to fix it. And then I walk into the room and then I'd start listening to people. I'm like, oh, that wasn't your issue at all. It was this other thing. I need to build something different for you. So, I think sometimes going in with that mode of like, I don't always have the right answer. Someone else it might help change my mind or give me a better idea that we could implement that's going to be a million times better. So I think removing ego, not feeling like I always have the right answer, being open to feedback, like those kinds of things really make I think projects sing. You can really do a lot of cool stuff if you're open-minded.
Yeah, and I always I personally am I sometimes I've taken it on like leadership positions and I'm like, oh, am I really ready for this position? So I've been very honest with my team when I'm like, guys, I'm out of my depth here. We are going to figure it out together. And like, honestly, I think that 9 times out of 10, that has worked out 10 times better for me, just being like, we're out of our depth a little bit. We have a problem. We're going to figure it out. Let's sit down and work together through it. And honestly, I think that your team tends to respect you a little bit more, have that perspective, like, oh, so we can just be figuring it out as we go along. That's okay. Like, we don't.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have to have all the answers.
Because
Yes.
everybody, like when I was coming up through, everybody always had all the answers. And I was like, oh, I have to be like that. I always have to have the answers. I can't look it up on Google. But then come to find out they were actually Googling it while I'm standing right in front of them, asking them questions on it because they didn't know the answers either.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things is just being really genuine. Like I have no problem. I think sometimes people, this is the other thing, having two PhDs, they're like, oh, she's got two PhDs, she's got real knowledge. I mean, yeah, for sure. I've read a lot of documentation and I've conducted some experiments, but by no means do I know everything. And like most doctoral studies, you hone in on this really niche topic that, yes, I might be an expert in this teeny tiny little piece of cybersecurity, but the rest of it, I know quite a bit, but you can't possibly know everything. I think that's why I like the idea of blending research and academia with what we do as practitioners, because I'm constantly always learning. I'm learning from my students. Like, yes, I'm teaching them, but they're always teaching me something new. I listen to them so much because they come to me with the most thoughtful questions. And I'm like, oh, yeah, let's dig into that. Let's see what we can do. So I think it's, if you kind of take that continuous learner mindset and just know that there's no way we can learn everything, it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah. I train a lot of juniors, and a lot of times they will like come to me with like a question, and I'm like, well, good question. Let's look into this.
Yeah.
Let's have some fun with it. Make it a project, I guess, because like now I'm intrigued and interested in learning about this. So let's do it. And you can use it to be fun, because you can spin up some projects off of it and just like have some fun projects out there. I always love having like one or two fun projects out there for like team members to just go contribute on that they enjoy contributing on, right? Not that they have to do it. I mean, I hope they enjoy contributing on everything, but like
Yeah, give them a fun side project. It's one of the things I like to do too. I always have at least one side project going that's like just for fun, because I feel the same way. I also feel like it's helpful for innovation. If you've always got one side project going and there's no deliverables, there's no due dates, there's just sort of, hey, we'd like to do this thing. Can we do it? I think that's fun too, because it gives you something else to work on. And chances are, like for me, those are always skill building. Whether we're picking, like the first time I learned Python, it was a total side project that somebody was working on. And they were like, hey, I'm doing this in Python. Do you know Python? And I was like, nope, but I'll figure it out. So, it's a lot of times those side projects are really good learning opportunities. I tell everybody, especially junior people that are like just getting their foot in the door or starting to kind of get involved, my method for just kind of getting involved in lots of different things and learning lots of different tech, I always raise my hand. It doesn't matter if someone's like, hey, can you do this? I'm like, yep, sure I can. Yeah, I could do it.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'll figure it out. Exactly. And most of the times what I find out is that like nobody else knows how to do it. So if I learn how to do it, then I become the expert, right? So it's like, okay, I learned how to be a DBA, a SQL DBA. Nobody else wanted to learn SQL. And I was like, okay, I'll learn it. And then I just happened to become a SQL DBA. So I always encourage people to raise your hand for projects, even if you're not quite sure if you can fully, if you're not quite sure, it might be a new skill. It's a great opportunity to learn something new. So I always encourage people to raise their hands and not be afraid to fail, because you might, but you're going to learn a lot along the way and not make that mistake again, for sure. So. Yeah.
And more often than not, I've seen people like really just like they rise to the occasion, and it's not like, and they surprise themselves. Like, I mean, I've even done it where I'm like, man, I really just surprised myself with that. Like, I didn't think I could do that. And like, look what I did. Like, so like, I mean, you will surprise yourself more often than not with what you're able to accomplish. But you're right. Even if you do fail, like what's worse is going to happen? You're going to learn something from it.
Yeah, 100%. I know, I don't share this a lot, but writing my first book, I was really, really nervous, because writing a book is it's a very vulnerable thing to do, to put yourself out there and to, put your experience and your expertise out there and for other people to read and hope that they like it. So, that was a thing that I thought, oh, I might fail at this. This might be real bad. But I kind of pushed the fear down because I knew I really wanted to do it. And I was like, you know what? even if it bombs, this is my first book. And I know I'm going to do better the second time. And I need the experience of doing this, because if I don't try it, then I'll never know. So, so anyway, and the second book, you know, it felt so much more natural. It was easier with all of the research. And anyway, so I encourage anyone who's interested in doing something, writing a blog, starting a podcast, writing a book. You know, those are all things that are possible. You know, there's going to be some stumbling blocks. Like if you go back and listen to the first episodes of the Resilient Cyber podcast that I did with Chris Hughes, they're a little rough. They were a little rough, but we had our first couple of episodes where we were figuring out editing and all that kind of stuff. And then it was like smooth sailing for 3 years. So, you know, it's definitely worth it in the end.
Yeah. I definitely, my first podcast, same. If you go back and listen to those recordings, whoo, I'm like yelling in the microphone because I had noise canceling headphones on and I couldn't hear myself talk. And I'm a person, I have to be able to hear myself talk. Otherwise I can't think right. So,
yep.
Oh, but you get better and then you grow from it. Okay, cool. So we are getting close to time. I'm just hoping people would comment and leave us some comments, but let me look, because it looks like we have notifications. So I'm just wondering if we're not seeing them on the live. See if we have any comments out here. I'm just wanting to make sure. Okay, cool. So what are your key, we're wrapping up. First off, do you have any other questions that you want to, or any other topics that you kind of want to discuss more about? And then we'll do final takeaways, key takeaways, and wrap on up.
Yeah, I think those were the big things that I wanted to hit around human factors, vulnerability management, data visualization. Like those are the biggest things. So I can hop into key takeaways if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay. Key takeaways. Number 1, build relationships. Super important, very helpful in so many different ways. And build relationships outside of chaos. Build them in the good times so that when the bad times happen, it's a little bit easier. You're not trying to build a relationship in the middle of chaos. I think the second takeaway for me would be data visualization can be just as powerful as the tools and configurations and things that you're doing kind of on the back end. So consider it from the user's perspective, the data that they're seeing, and try different things. Like don't be afraid to, you know, I think we get stuck on dashboards sometimes, or we get stuck in spreadsheets or lists. And it's like, I've actually looked into 3D modeling for different visualizations and graphing and mapping. There's a lot of really cool tools and visualization techniques out there. So I encourage people to explore those when it comes to your vulnerability data. I think probably the third takeaway is that human factors it's a big field. There's a lot to learn from human factors, and we're bringing it into cybersecurity. You know, we just sort of scratched the surface on burnout and stress and alert fatigue, things like that. There's a lot that we can learn from a discipline that's pretty old. I think it's been around since the 1930s, because originally
you did say it was from like the aeronautical space,
aviation,
right?
Yeah, aviation. Yeah, it was. I think it as a discipline, it used to be human factors and ergonomics, which is where the example of the hammer came from. So how you actually hold the tool. But human factors is a lot bigger than design and engineering and psychology. It's really the combination of all three. And so I encourage people, there's a lot of great resources out there. Dr. Calvin Nobles, Dr. Margaret Cunningham. She was actually a cognitive psychologist and came into the cybersecurity space. She's wonderful. She has a ton of published research. Highly recommend her. Those would probably be my big takeaways. Human factors is a big field, but there's a lot of different ways that we can integrate it into cybersecurity.
Yeah. I like that a lot. And it's definitely something like, you're 100% right. When you first said like, human factors, I was like, okay, we're talking more like social engineering type of conversation. And then we got here and I was like, oh yeah, I guess there is like a psychological impact of like how you actually like could configure a tool, or like, you know, if we can make this easier to be configured somewhere in a little nice dashboard, rather than having to go and run some code to do it instead. But if we could just check a box rather than having to like run a boatload of code
Yes.
on the back end. So like that is a really cool perspective, and I definitely will be looking into it more myself. My key takeaways is really, and a lot of what you said, especially when it comes to like design and implementation, and the psychology aspect of it kind of all coming together, is being good to people is going to get you good things at the end of the day, right? So like when you're able to bring in and you actually care enough to go talk to your users and say, hey, what can I do to make your life a little bit easier? It's going to just bring in that communication, that partnership, and really help build that great communication between the two groups, and having that all come together. So that would be my key takeaway: be a decent person. Don't, like, if you have a good heart and you have it, your heart's in the right place, and you want to help people, I think that that's a really good way of looking at it, is like just go and continue to ask people what you can do better and how you can help them.
Yeah, I think I leave a lot of, because I do conference talks and things, and usually when I leave them, I'm like, just be kind to people. Give people grace, because you don't know what somebody's going through, and sometimes, you know, they're going through a lot, and then they also have 10,000 vulnerabilities to remediate, and that's a bad day. So
Yeah.
So I find that sometimes just being kind and giving some people some grace, they're usually a little more receptive to getting things done, and, you know, especially if you work with them a little bit. So yeah, I like that too. I just say start with kindness, you know, then you can take it from there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Dr. Robinson, it was so great to have you on. I'm grateful to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will be back in a few weeks with our next episode. So I hope you all have a great time. And until next time.